When Bobby was growing up, he filled the house with just joyful moments. Very curious little boy, creative, adventuresome, a little bit mischievous, compassionate, and often a protector. Would protect and stand up for other children in the neighborhood and his brothers and sisters. He was on missions all the time, whether it was climbing trees, building things, just hiking down the woods. Very, very compassionate and loving. He had a very tender heart. Bobby first decided to look into the military and find out what his options were right out of high school. As I mentioned, with his hobbies being so vast and creative, he wasn't sure where he needed to go as far as a career. And he really was passionate about helping people. So he wanted to go into the National Guard. So it was the Ohio National Guard, because he felt that it would be helping in crisis for the state of Ohio and helping people. When 9/11 happened, he immediately packed his bags, had them in the kitchen, and was awaiting to be called. At that point he wasn't, but shortly after there was an opportunity for him to join another troop, another unit in Norwalk, Ohio, and he decided that he really wanted to go over and serve in Iraqi freedom and serve over there. And that was a tough time for me as his mom when he made that decision. But I knew that it had to be his decision. And so he then left to go to Iraq as a combat engineer. He protected me, and so he didn't share details with me. He did share with his father and his brother. I found out about one of the IED explosions just by chance. We were at a support group, family readiness group, and one of the mothers came up and said, "Are you Bobby's mom?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, I want to thank you. Your son saved my son's life, and if it wasn't for him, they would all have perished. And I, of course, didn't have any idea. When his time to come home from being deployed to Iraq, he notified us and told us the dates. And I noticed a couple weeks before he was coming home, he was going out on missions constantly. And like I said, he was a combat engineer, so he was detonating IEDs. And I said to him, I said, "Bobby, why do you keep going out? There's so many other people in your unit." And he said, "Mom, these guys have children." He said, "I know you and Dad would miss me, but I couldn't live with myself if something happened to one of them 2 weeks before they were seeing their children. So I'm volunteering to go out." So he had gone out a lot of missions in that last 2 to 3 weeks. So when he came home, the celebration for him, he couldn't wait to get home. And the celebration was just magnificent. The town celebrated, the family celebrated, and he just kept saying, "I just want to see my family, I want everybody there." And that's all I kept talking about, wanting to be with not just his parents and siblings, but cousins and uncles and aunts and friends, and they were there. And there was a huge celebration. And he just sparkled and glowed when he came home. I first noticed that there was something different in Bobby when some behaviors became apparent that were unusual for him, and that was around 2 to 3 months. In retrospect, I think I knew when he first came home during the celebration, and he would stress, "Mom, you're going to hear about post-traumatic stress, and don't worry, everything's fine. You're going to hear that's a problem with a lot of soldiers. I'm fine, Mom, don't worry." But there was something that I felt hadn't come back. Or let me rephrase this. I felt like he was here, but he hadn't left Iraq. And one particular experience I had was he often would have night terrors, but he normally didn't come get me. He would come get his dad, or tried to cope with it by himself. But this particular one, he came in and got me from bed. And he said, "Mom, can you come out in the living room with me?" And I said, "Yeah." And I came out, and I laid on the couch. And he said, "Would it be okay if I laid on the floor and slept by you?" And I said, "Of course." So he laid down, and as I was laying there, I watched him. And he would physically be loading, and his feet would be moving, and he'd be loading. And then he'd sit up, and then he'd go back down. And he'd be doing this sound asleep, but not resting. And it was like 4 or 5 times that he was doing this. And as I laid there watching him, I thought, how awful that he had to endure this every night. And then he went through the motion again. And this time he got up and walked to the chair next to me. And I said, "Bobby?" Because I wasn't sure if he was awake or not. And he said, and I'm thinking, how awful. And he said, "I don't know how I got to be so lucky." And I go, "Lucky? What do you mean?" And he said, "To have a mom like you. It's like winning the lottery, Mom." And he always thanked us for being there. And I don't think we realize when we hear post-traumatic stress, it sounds like, oh, that's really bad. But it's so much bigger than that. And we just don't understand, and we don't have the information about how much bigger it is. The last time I was with Bobby, it was on his birthday, May 12th. And by chance, in which I actually think it was a gift from God, I was leaving out of town, and I hadn't planned on taking the morning off, but it ended up that I didn't have any patient schedule, and I was able to just be home. And he was just so delighted that we could spend that time together before I left for my business trip. And during that morning, afternoon, we spent together. He was hopeful. He was excited about plans he had as far as healing and making appointments. And he was trying to get back to doing some of the things that he was doing just the year before, because there was other things that had come up with his health that made it more challenging for him. But even through everything, as far as the pain, the physical pain, the emotional pain, he was still hopeful. He still was joyful. And he was also still helping others in many, many ways, even more than we realized. And he was still living his life to the fullest, even in the midst of everything that he was going through.